Welcome to The Debate. Imagine trying to build a skyscraper, right? But instead of being handed steel beams and a concrete foundation, you are handed a warm fleece blanket.
Good luck with the zoning permits on that one.
Right, exactly. But that is the paradox we are looking at today. When we analyze the foundation of any complex structural system, there is, well, an expectation of absolute rigidity.
Yeah, you lay out the mathematical grid.
You lay out the grid, the architectural blueprint dictates exactly where every load-bearing element must go, and, you do not negotiate with those laws,
But when you step into the world of foundational language acquisition, suddenly that rigid blueprint is heavily disguised.
heavily disguised, yes. Today we are examining the hidden mechanics of human learning by analyzing a transcript from a beginner English instruction series. Right. It's a series called English Bridge.
Exactly. And we're focusing specifically on episode 6 from that material, which is titled My Family. On the surface, this is a very simple 6 to 7 minute exchange between two hosts, Sara and Tom.
Yeah, they're teaching basic family vocabulary to an absolute beginner, what linguists would call an A1 level learner.
Right. But beneath that highly accessible, cheerful surface lies a profound tension regarding how adults actually acquire a new language.
It really is a fascinating text because it brings up a core question about the engine of comprehension. When you are at the earliest possible stages of cognitive mapping, what is actually driving the retention of new information?
And that right there is the central question we are debating today. When we analyze this foundational material, what is the primary pedagogical engine?
Right. Does the efficacy of the lesson stem from its transmission of rigid linguistic taxonomies, structural grammar, or does it rely fundamentally on the cultivation of a parasocial, affective bond between the instructor and the student?
It's the classic structure versus emotion debate.
Exactly. And I will argue that the lesson relies almost entirely on structural categorization. It provides a strict mathematical grid of possessive adjectives and relational vocabulary. That rigid taxonomy is the true, undeniable foundation for language acquisition.
And I come at it from a completely different way. I maintain that this structural framework, while, obviously present, is functionally secondary.
Secondary?
Yes, secondary. The true pedagogical mechanism at play here is the highly engineered emotional safety and the artificial kinship established by the hosts. Without that parasocial bonding, the structural grid is inert. It is just useless to the learner.
Well, let us break down the mechanics of the structuralist perspective first, because I think we have to appreciate just how overwhelming it is to be an A1 learner.
Oh, it's terrifying.
It really is. When an adult approaches a new language, they have virtually no functional capacity in that target language. The cognitive load is immense. It is just a chaotic, terrifying noise.
Right.
So to manage that chaos, learning has to fundamentally be an exercise in structural mapping. You must give the learner a rigid blueprint to categorize their reality, and if you look at the text of this English bridge lesson, that is exactly what Sara and Tom do.
They chat a bit too.
They chat, sure, but they do not just chat. They introduce an incredibly tight grammatical focus on possessive adjectives mapped directly to specific gendered and relational binaries.
When you say relational binaries, you mean the literal translation of relationships into absolute categories?
Precisely. The lesson isn't just teaching words, and is teaching the learner how to put the world into very specific, unyielding boxes.
Right. The whole his and her thing.
Exactly. The text explicitly dictates, quote, we say his for a man, we say her for a woman. It outlines exact relational pairs, husband and wife, son and daughter, brother and sister.
Yeah, it's very formulaic.
It gives the learner an exact, replicable formula to organize reality into manageable, correct English sentences. It is deeply taxonomical. You have to understand that the brain needs a filing cabinet before it can start filing away papers.
A filing cabinet.
Okay, yes. The explicit scaffolding, the rules governing who gets called his and who gets called her, is that filing cabinet. Without it, everything else just falls apart.
Look, I see the logic there, I do, but it completely ignores the biological reality of a learner in that exact moment.
How so?
Well, you were talking about filing cabinets and structural grids, but you also just mentioned that the A1 learner is experiencing terrifying noise.
Yes.
That terror is the entire key to my position. What you're describing is a logical system, but human brains, especially adult brains trying to learn a language, do not operate on pure logic.
They operate on what then?
They operate on survival mechanisms. Let us look at the actual vocabulary density in this transcript. It is remarkably sparse.
Well, it's an A1 lesson.
Right, but if the primary engine were structural mapping, the lesson would be incredibly dense with vocabulary permutations to fill out that grid you mentioned. Instead, the vast majority of the transcript is dedicated to affective reinforcement.
Affective meaning emotional?
Yes, emotional and psychological. Look at the language used to frame the audience, right from the first seconds of the video.
The welcome messages.
Yeah. Welcome back to the English Bridge family. We love you all. We are really proud of you. Sara literally stops the grammar instruction halfway through to tell the listener, you are doing something wonderful.
I mean, it's nice, but it's just encouragement.
No, it is crucial. It's because of something called the affective filter. Let me break down how that works. When an adult learner feels anxious, stupid, or overwhelmed, their brain's threat detection center, the amygdala, lights up.
Right, the fight or flight response.
Exactly. It goes into fight or flight. And when the amygdala is hyperactive, it literally blocks the neural pathways to the prefrontal cortex, which, as we know, is where cognitive processing and language acquisition happen.
So you are saying the emotional language is a biological necessity?
Absolutely. If the learner is paralyzed by the fear of making a mistake, that structural grid you were talking about cannot even be processed. It bounces right off a closed door.
Interesting.
Therefore, cognitive retention at the A1 level is achieved not through grammatical grids, but by inviting the learner into a simulated, risk-free social relationship. The hosts are building an emotional safety net first to lower the drawbridge. They have to disarm the amygdala before they can slip the vocabulary into the prefrontal cortex.
Okay, but wait, let's follow that metaphor. If we accept that the emotional safety net is what lowers the drawbridge, what is actually being carried across that bridge?
Well, the words, obviously.
It is the structure. The structure is the payload. Let's look closely at the specific role play between the instructional hosts, because I think it perfectly illustrates that the structure is the whole point.
You mean the part where Tom asks about Sarah's family?
Yes. Halfway through the lesson, Tom asks Sarah to tell him about her family. Sarah doesn't just casually describe her relatives like a normal person would. She delivers a highly structured, almost algorithmic template.
Uh-huh.
She says, "My mother's name is Mary. She is a nurse. My father's name is David. He is a teacher." And then she moves to her grandmother. Her name is Rose. She is 78 years old and she is very strong.
I mean, yeah, it does sound a bit robotic.
Because it is not a natural, spontaneous conversation at all. It is a highly engineered mathematical equation meant for rote replication. Think back to our opening metaphor of the architectural blueprint.
Right.
The lesson is essentially handing the novice builder a rigid framework. My blank's name is blank. Pronoun is a profession.
Fill in the blanks.
Exactly. The learner simply swaps out the materials. They insert their own mother's name, their own father's job. The nouns and adjectives can change, but the load-bearing walls of the sentence structure remain rigid, predictable, and identical.
Right, it's very repetitive.
They are essentially handing the learner a grammatical Mad Libs. That is pure structuralism.
Okay, but that assumes the ultimate goal of the exercise is just structural replication. If we look at what happens immediately after Sara delivers that algorithmic template, the structuralist theory starts to fracture.
Fracture? How?
Well, how does Tom react? If the goal is purely mathematical correctness, Tom's response should validate her grammar.
I'm not sure I follow.
He should say, excellent use of the possessive adjective her, Sarah, and perfect subject-verb agreement. But he doesn't do that.
Obviously not. That would be weird.
Right. His immediate enthusiastic response is, that's a lovely family, Sara.
Well, he has to maintain the conversational illusion of the program. I mean, they are pretending to be friends chatting in a living room.
But it is so much more than an illusion.
It is pragmatic modeling. And by pragmatic, I mean the social utility of the language. Why do we speak at all?
To communicate facts.
To connect. By responding to the emotional content of her statement rather than the grammatical structure, Tom is modeling the actual social reaction required in real English discourse. He is proving that the lesson is prioritizing connection over exactness.
I think that's a stretch.
Think about what's actually happening in the learner's mind here. Tom is showing the A1 listener that the purpose of saying "my mother is a nurse" isn't to prove to a teacher that you know the word "my." The purpose is to connect with another human being who will then smile and say, "That's a lovely family."
Okay, but
The pedagogical priority is human connection. It is why Tom explicitly tells the listener at the beginning to get comfortable, grab a cup of tea or coffee. He is deliberately setting a living room scene, not a classroom scene, because the pragmatic force of the language is relational, not structural.
wait, so you were suggesting that the grammatical accuracy is just a side effect of wanting to have a pleasant social interaction?
In a way, yes.
I'm sorry, but I find that deeply unconvincing because it elevates the set dressing above the actual curriculum.
It's not set dressing.
Let's look at the practice tip at the very end of the text. This is the moment where the hosts drop the conversational facade and explicitly instruct the learner on how to apply the knowledge, and what do they tell them to do?
They tell them to map it out.
Yes, Sara says, draw your family tree and write each person's name and job in English. For example, my mother Mary nurse.
Right, the homework assignment.
But think about what a family tree actually is. It is a literal, visual taxonomy. It is an organizational chart. You have hierarchical nodes, grandparents at the top, branching down to parents, branching down to children.
Sure, it's a diagram.
You cannot get more structurally rigid than a map with branches connecting discrete data points. The ultimate application of the lesson, the thing they are told to actually go and do, isn't to go have a cup of tea and chat with someone.
Well, they do say to show it to a friend later.
But the primary task is to plot data points onto a hierarchical chart. That practice tip proves, unequivocally, the structuralist intent of the material. They are teaching a taxonomy, and they are testing a taxonomy.
Look, I don't buy that the family tree proves a rigid structuralist intent, especially when you look at the immediate context surrounding that instruction.
The context is them giving a homework assignment.
You have to look at the very next sentence Sara delivers. Literally a breath after telling them to draw the tree, she leans in and tells the learner, even if you make mistakes, that is perfectly okay. Mistakes help you learn faster.
Well, sure. Acknowledging that beginners make mistakes doesn't negate the existence of the rules they are making mistakes against. The data points still have to go in the right boxes on the tree.
But it deliberately undercuts the idea that grammatical precision is the primary engine of the lesson.
Does it?
Yes. If the mathematical grid were truly the central, most important thing, the instruction would be check your work carefully to ensure you matched the gendered pronouns correctly to the specific branches. Instead, the hosts are actively dismantling the fear of the structural rules.
I mean, they're just being encouraging.
It's more than that. Let's look at the mechanics of why taking risks is biologically necessary for building neural pathways. To acquire language, the brain has to hypothesize a rule, test it by speaking, and then receive feedback.
Okay.
If you are terrified of making a mistake, you never test the rule. By explicitly giving permission to fail, Sara is saying the rules don't matter as much as your participation.
The rules absolutely matter, or it's not English.
But the family tree isn't about rigid data plotting. It's a low-stakes, solitary sandbox designed to build confidence before the learner is asked to, as the tip leader says, show it to a friend. Psychological safety is the absolute prerequisite for any of this mapping to occur.
But you can only build confidence if you actually have the tools to construct the sentence. You cannot just be confident in a vacuum. You need the structural scaffolding to test the rule in the first place.
I agree you need the tools, but
Let me shift our focus to something else you brought up, this idea of the English bridge family and the heavy emotional language. You are arguing this is a highly engineered parasocial safety net. I argue it is merely the transactional wrapper of modern digital media.
a transactional wrapper, really?
Yes. Look at the sheer volume of the transcript that is dedicated entirely to asking for digital engagement.
Oh, you mean the YouTube stuff?
Exactly. Click the red subscribe button, hit the bell icon, give this video a big thumbs up, Leave us a comment below. Tom even says your support by subscribing and liking means absolutely everything to us.
Right, standard creator sign-offs.
This is not a pedagogical safety net designed to lower the effective filter. This is an algorithmic necessity for creators. It is highly transactional. They are trading free vocabulary lessons for audience metrics to grow their channel.
I think you're being overly cynical.
I'm not saying there's anything inherently wrong with that. It is how the digital economy works, but it is entirely separate from the pedagogical core of the lesson. We shouldn't confuse the online hustle with linguistic theory.
Oh, I strongly disagree. It is not separate at all. It is deeply, brilliantly intertwined.
How so?
You are looking at the requests for subscriptions as pure transaction, but look at how they frame those requests to an A1 learner. They don't just say, click like to feed the algorithm.
Well, of course not.
Sara says, subscribing is completely free, and it really helps our channel grow so we can keep making free English lessons for learners around the world just like you. Tom says, thank you from the bottom of our hearts.
Still sounds transactional to me.
They are establishing a reciprocal emotional relationship. But here is the real aha moment of this entire transcript. Here is the absolute genius of what they're doing. Consider the irony of the topic itself.
The topic of family.
Yes, they are teaching the vocabulary of family by first inducting the viewer into an artificial family.
Wait, say more about that. You mean the English bridge family Tom mentions in the opening?
Exactly. Think about what it feels like to be an A1 learner sitting alone in a room, struggling, feeling isolated and inadequate. Before they ever teach the word mother or brother, Tom looks right at the camera and says, "Welcome back to the English bridge family. We love having you here." They are taking the cold, structural vocabulary of kinship, the literal definitions of relatives, and anchoring it to the warm, parasocial kinship they are actively building with the lonely viewer. It is like a Trojan horse for the brain's amygdala.
A Trojan horse?
Yes, the friendly, inclusive family talk keeps the brain's defense mechanisms completely powered down, allowing the payload, the strict grammar rules, to sneak past the gates without triggering anxiety.
So the vocabulary lesson itself is mirroring the community they are trying to build.
Yes. When Sara says at the end of the lesson, "You have worked so hard, and we are really proud of you. Learning a new language is one of the best things you can do for yourself and your future," that emotional validation is the psychological lifeline.
Right.
It is the actual cognitive anchor. If it were just a transactional data exchange of pronouns and nouns, the learner would abandon the series the moment it got difficult. That parasocial bond is the only reason the learner will return for episode 7 about the weather.
I mean, I see the elegance in that argument. The idea that this specific lesson on family is uniquely suited to leverage the host's parasocial community building is, well, it's a very sharp observation.
Thank you.
It really casts the digital engagement requests in a different light. However, I still maintain that without the explicit linguistic rules, the learner is left with nothing but warm feelings.
Warm feelings are a good start.
A start, sure. But if the text doesn't explicitly map possessives like my and their to specific family roles, and if it doesn't clearly define that a brother is a male sibling and an uncle is a parent's brother, the effective filter can be as low as possible, but the learner still wouldn't be able to generate a single novel sentence.
But without the lower filter, they won't even try.
But the scaffolding, that rigid taxonomical blueprint, is the undeniable, necessary foundation. An A1 learner cannot move from passive listening to active production without the formulas to parse the complexity of human relationships into communicable, structural English.
And I would summarize my position by suggesting that your structural scaffolding, while logically sound and mathematically necessary, would be completely useless without the intense parasocial validation that surrounds it.
Useless is a strong word.
But it's true. You can build the strongest steel grid in the world, but if the environment is too hostile, too cold, or too intimidating, the learner will simply never step inside the building.
Fair enough.
The affective safety net, the constant reassurance that we love you all,
the explicit permission to make mistakes, the invitation to grab a cup of tea, this is what actually motivates the human brain to lower its biological defenses. The emotional connection isn't just a nice wrapper. It is the catalyst that makes the grammar stick.
Well, it seems we have arrived at a fascinating point of convergence. What this transcript ultimately reveals is that effective foundational language instruction requires an incredibly carefully constructed environment.
Right.
It seems to demand a dual approach. It must brilliantly disguise rigorous, structural, pedagogical strategies within the wrapper of casual, friendly, and emotionally supportive dialogue.
Absolutely. The hosts are delivering highly precise, mathematically strict grammatical rules, but they are doing it with smiles, encouragement, and a literal invitation to join their family.
Yeah.
It makes you realize how deeply psychological the act of learning a language truly is. You are never just teaching words. You are managing a human being's fear of failure.
You really are. And it highlights the immense value of looking deeply at seemingly simple beginner texts, like an A1 lesson on the family, to truly understand the intricate mechanics of human cognition.
Definitely.
It would be fascinating to examine how these dual strategies of structural scaffolding and parasocial bonding evolve in subsequent, more complex lessons in the material.
Right, like the teased episode 7 about the weather. How do you maintain that intense emotional connection and that Trojan horse strategy when you're just talking about rain and clouds?
Exactly.
The strategies must have to shift, and exploring how they maintain the affective filter there would provide even more insight into this pedagogical model.
Indeed it would. But for today, we return to where we began. When you look at the construction of foundational language, you have to decide what you are really seeing in the material.
Yeah.
Are you looking at the uncompromising rigidity of the steel beams holding everything up against the chaotic force of a new language? Or are you looking at the warmth of the fleece blanket, disarming the brain's defenses and creating an environment safe enough for someone to dare to speak at all?
It's a great question.
The answer, as always, is embedded in the material itself, waiting for us to uncover it.